No, can't see any declaration of interest. Straight on to item 3, where we'll be looking at the corporate plan and potentially making recommendations to Cabinet ahead of their consideration. So without any further ado, if I can hand over to Ramona Herman, who's going to outline the report for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to remind members to begin with of the context of the report. So there's a current corporate plan which lasts up until the end of March this year. So we're looking at the draft of the new corporate plan today. That will last from April 2022 until 2026. So it's been extended to 4 years in order to better align with the timescales of the medium-term financial strategy. It's intended to be a high-level strategic document, so it doesn't list everything that we do as a council. It's trying to show a direction of travel, but then also in the technical appendix, gives some granular detail around some of the time-bound activities to give transparency around the council's work. It's very much shaped by the Norwich 2040 City Vision, as well as our ongoing response to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the main changes, I would say, is that the current 3 corporate priorities plus healthy organisation have evolved into 5 aims, which are set out in the main body of the document and then structure the technical appendix. People live independently and well in a diverse and safe city. Norwich is a sustainable and healthy city. Norwich has the infrastructure and housing it needs to be a successful city. The city has an inclusive economy in which residents have equal opportunity to flourish, and Norwich City Council is in good shape to serve the city. In the covering note to the draft document, I tried to set out the fact that we are doing a couple of things in parallel. So we had some staff looking at the draft document at the same time, essentially, as we gave you the draft note. So I tried to express in the covering note that there are some very small wording changes in the version that is going to go to Cabinet in early February. They don't change the meaning of anything. They just give a little bit more detail in a few places where I think the draft as it stood wasn't clear enough to a new reader. So in terms of next steps, clearly you as a committee will have a discussion about the draft document today and then come up with any recommendations you would like to make to Cabinet about any changes to the content or the wording of the report. Cabinet is meeting on the 9th of February to look at that and obviously also look at your recommendations. And following the Cabinet meeting, we as officers will make any changes to the draft that Cabinet agree and then submit the document for the full council meeting on the 22nd of February. The other thing I wanted to do today, and hopefully the technology will work, is just share with you, our comms team have put the text which you've seen just in a plain Word document into a design version. So I just wanted to screen share to give you a bit of an idea of what the final document is likely to look like. See if I can just slowly scroll through a bit so you get a sense of what the pages, the designed up pages look like, which kind of gives it more of a feel of what the document will appear to an outside audience than the draft you've seen. So I think, Chair, that was all I wanted to say in terms of introduction.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, that introduction. I'd also like to welcome the various people who are here to assist with our deliberations of that today. Probably too many to mention, actually, but Councillor Waters, this is a document in your name as leader of the council. I wonder if you have any particular things that you'd like to add at this stage before we begin our discussions.
Thanks very much, James, and thank you for inviting me to your scrutiny committee this evening. I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say and bring forward for Cabinet to consider. I suppose the only point I would make at this stage is having written introductions to corporate plans Each year, some have been iterations from the previous year, others have been more significant rewrites, is looking back at some of the introductions I've written. It's just very interesting about what new things come into play, what changes take place, what are priorities in one corporate plan at the beginning of its life, and during that period, what other factors really need to be considered. And of course, in the case of this corporate plan, I think we've got the accumulation of a number of issues. COVID is obviously at the forefront of that, though maybe next year we'll be seeing it as a factor, but not a preeminent factor. Brexit has not had much salience for a little while, but in the last year or so, the impacts of that have begun to play out. Issues around climate change have become a much greater sort of societal preoccupation, and the issues around inequality rather, which has increased during the COVID period, and how we as an organisation, as a council collectively, have to have the right policies for people, have to be able to deliver, have to reflect in the organisation of the council. I think that's given more significance, more prominence in this document. And I think with this particular iteration, it's additional priorities, 5, but those are tied in with some tight timetables, some KPIs to test if we're able to achieve the objectives that we've set out, and to subject those, of course, periodically to scrutiny. So it is a high-level document. It carries forward, themes of this administration over a period of time. It recognises new priorities in what is a very tight and difficult set of financial circumstances. So I think it's a very important step in terms of how we're going to be approaching things over the next period. And I'll be, as I said at the beginning of my comments, very interested to hear what colleagues have to say in their response to this document.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, I did note in your forward the sentence or paragraph about Brexit, and you talked about it played out for many years ahead. I do think that was slightly optimistic, and I think we're probably into the realms of decades for the challenges of Brexit. So, yes. Stephen, I don't know whether you've obviously got a forward in here as well. I don't know whether you wanted to just give any sort of introductory comments as well.
Sure.
Before to start their questions and discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just kind of building, I guess, on what the leader was saying. I mean, it's a really important document. It's not meant to capture absolutely everything we do as a council, but it's if you were to read one document, it's our main, along with our COVID recovery plan, this is our main kind of strategic framework. So if our residents, if our businesses, if our partners were to read one document to capture what we think is important, it would be our corporate plan. It's a framework against which we will use to allocate our budget. But we didn't want it just to be a strategy document. We didn't want it just to be something that sets out our kind of aims and objectives. We wanted to bring it to life by having a set of key deliverables there, which give you a flavour of the sorts of activities and things we will be focusing on to achieve those aims, and also a set of performance measures against which we can measure progress. So again, those activities, those performance measures don't capture absolutely everything we do, but it provides a strategic framework, but it's backed up by a set of key deliverables, and it's backed up by a set of performance measures. So it's there's kind of 3 elements to it, because we wanted to focus on delivery as well as strategy.
Great, thanks very much for that. I've got a couple of members who've had hands up already, virtual hands. So Councillor Carlo, I think your virtual hand was up first. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stephen, Alan, and Ramona. The corporate plan document looks fairly near final version, so I hope that we'll be able to make recommendations today and that they can be accepted. But I wanted to raise climate change as a cross-cutting issue, but I feel at present it's pigeonholed both in the 2040 vision, where it's really framed as a quality of life issue, whereas and in the economy section, there's no mention of a low carbon economy, instead of which there's talk about economic growth and maximising growth. And then secondly, to bring that to the corporate plan, and again, climate change is pigeonholed under the environment strategy, whereas we need to, as a council, work across all the different departments and ensure that climate change colours all the work we do, ranging from retrofitting homes or procurement or whatever. So I wanted to raise that and to say that I do feel that the 2040 vision needs some reframing in the light of the cross-cutting issue. And also I feel that, that one useful action would be for the business leaders to produce a plan about how Norwich can transition to a low carbon economy. And then in relation to where climate change sits within the City Council, to think about that. And I found a useful recommendation that was made to the Croydon Climate Crisis Commission as a way of overcoming the problem of working in silos. And that is to create a senior level resilience officer with cross-council responsibility for implementing actions and ensuring the council actively works to support the net zero target and climate change adaptation across all the council departments. So I'd like to put that on the table. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Carlo. Who would like to come in and pick up any of those points? Councillor Waters.
I could make a start. I mean, I think it's a very important point that Denise raises, but I'm reflecting on one of the links that we have in this document, which references the environment strategy and the climate change commission, as well as the work of the 2040 vision. What I do know is that those documents describe that sort of cross-organisational, cross-service, cross-activity that the council carries out in its political priorities, which do recognise that. I mean, I'm sort of picking up the point about whether there's a way of making that more obvious by reference to those documents. But I would also say that there is a business climate change group working as part of the 2040 partnership, which is looking at these issues about a low carbon economy. We know many of the partners that we're working with as part of 2040, like Aviva. I think Aviva are a particularly good example. And for goodness sake, climate change has to be on their radar because they're an insurance business, but have very imaginative and innovative ways in which they are approaching this. And the Good Economy Commission, we had a meeting today, and the issues around a carbon neutral economy will emerge as part of the objectives that will be set when that commission draws its conclusions in the middle of this year. So there may be a point, and it will be worth checking about the salience of those issues. But I think I'm confident that environmentally compliant economic model is one that's being worked on in a number of different ways by ourselves, but also by the partners that we work with.
Like, oh, sorry.
I was muted. Yeah, please do come in.
Yes, that's very helpful and we appreciate all that's going on. But I think in terms of the actual reading of the 2040 vision, at the moment it does come across as climate change sitting in a silo, and no mention of the low carbon economy in the dynamic city section. But coming on to the City Council itself and the mechanisms for dealing with climate change, at the moment, I think my feeling is that the climate change actions were very much driven by the environment manager, which is all well and good up to a point, but I think you need someone who can range across the whole council and knit everything together and ensure that everything's pointing in the same direction. And I don't think that's really the role of the environment manager, and I don't think it's possible for them to do that either. And so that's why I think Croydon have decided themselves that having a senior officer who can range across all the departments is a useful mechanism.
I would have to say that work has actually been done, and Ramona has, correct me if I'm wrong, has led on that, and a piece of work was done to look at all the different aspects of policy relating to climate change, the environment, that was put together and then was presented in the environment strategy, which of course has come to Cabinet and Council during last year. But I mean, Stephen may have some other points he'd want to make, get his hand up.
Yeah, Stephen, if I can bring you in, I think then Helen has some points to make as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just wanted to respond to that specific point. You know, I feel like we've addressed this directly through the restructure, which I brought forward last year, that was implemented this year. I think we had a small number of dedicated, hardworking officers in our environment team, but it felt like they were kind of out on a limb in a different part of the council. So through the restructure, I brought those responsibilities, that function, into this central corporate strategy team. So it's now a key corporate function for the council. So steps have been taken to address that, to bring it into more prominence, and I think we've been really successful in doing that. Most recently by getting access to several £1 million for retrofitting. So steps have been taken to strengthen our approach to how we coordinate response to climate change.
Thank you for that. Helen, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, similar to what Stephen was saying, so I won't talk for too long, but just to reassure that is absolutely the role that we are playing to draw this, to pull this work from across the whole organisation, and the piece of work that the leader referenced a moment ago that has taken place to refresh what our action plan looks like, has engaged colleagues from across the council, and we've had excellent engagement from colleagues across the council, and we'll be putting that together into some updated plans soon, as set out in the corporate plan draft that you've seen today. We're bolstering the size of the team that's focusing on this as well, so there's an awful lot of work going on to make sure that we have got that genuinely cross-cutting approach across the council.
Thank you for that. Just I had some yellow and real hands going up, so just so people know who I've seen. But Councillors Driver, Vaughn, Thomas, Osborne, and Galvin with questions. So I've seen all of you. And Councillor Driver, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's on a different subject completely, and probably just need a little bit of explanation for me. Under page 14, a fair city under the 2040 vision. I just want to know where it say will remove barriers to achievement and a high standard of living will be enjoyed by everyone. What kind of remove barriers are we thinking about? Is this a political views, Alan, or some officer can come in and tell me any barriers which they think should disappear to make the lives better?
In terms of people's improvement in people's material situation, policies around the work we're doing on the living wage and the aspiration to become a living wage place. I mean, we have had a significant increase in the number of organisations which are signing up to the real living wage, 16 so far this year. And we had an announcement, had a working party today, and Flagship Housing have accredited, and that means 120 of their staff are going to be paid the real living wage. So that is central, but more than that, the work of the Good Economy Commission has been looking very closely at what does good work look like, asking people about their experience of work and what makes them feel good about work and productive and valued, is a central driver, I think, in encouraging good employment practices. The cost of living crisis, which we will be debating. There is a discussion, there'll be a discussion and many aspects of that at our council meeting next week, has been a long time in the making. It is not just energy prices going up, it's the fact that people have suffered from chronic low pay, insecure employment, cuts in welfare support, particularly for people in work, so that we have people working and in poverty. So I think that is a central plank of our drivers on this, as well as, of course, all the other things we do related, and of course, to the environment, by making sure that we've got decent quality housing and funding for retrofitting and so on, to kind of help people with their financial bottom line. So I think there are a number of strands that are actively in play, and I think the plans of the Good Economy Commission to kind of drive that more broadly across the city as a positive strategy is going to be another way of pushing this agenda forward.
Okay, can I just ask, Alan, do you think those 5 points, do you think, no, the bullet points, do you think they're too small and too compact to actually tell us anything?
Yeah, so we're on page 14, are we, of the document?
It's sort of bottom of 13, top of 14.
All right. So I have my papers printed out back to front, so I'm finding it a bit of a challenge just finding those 13 to 14. Right. Can I come back to that in a minute once I've got my papers sorted out to answer Keith's question?
Yeah, sure. Any other any officer answers to Councillor Driver's question, or shall I move on to Councillor Vaughn Thomas, who is next? So, Councillor Thomas.
Hi, thank you for that, Chair. I've read through the papers, as you'd expect, and I have to say I endorse direction of travel, the aims and objectives of this, and obviously there's going to be a plethora of questions about the nitty-gritties of how we implement this. But the key is going to be, from what I see, is going to be innovation, and it's a huge challenge. The times I've mentioned innovation in the past, people have said, yeah, that's great, Vaughn. Can you show me where it's already happening? Well, can you demonstrate where it's already been implemented? Well, it's not innovation then, quite frankly. And we've all been operating in certain ways. And I can't be the only person who's been around knocking on doors. Now, I knock on a door to a relatively new house, looks lovely, and then I see the front door has got footprints on it, or it's got the imprint of a sledgehammer where somebody's burst in. It's really not just about the structures, changing those, it's about hearts and minds, it's about the people, and making sure that the people are equipped psychologically and have the right mindset to change. I know we like this idea of, think outside the box, but I've been in organisations, and I'm probably the case in Norwich City Council, where you think outside the box, you're straight in someone else's box, you want to be cross-cutting, but you get slapped down. So it's a huge issue. I don't quite know what the KPI is for innovation, but for this to be successful, there has got to be innovation. It's not just about changing structures, it's about the people that are going to be implementing it who have been working in a certain way. We all have. It needs to be different. We can't go on working the way we have in the past. I mean, in terms of addressing the climate change, the cost of living crisis, we're here because of the way we've been operating. Okay, there are things that we can't change in central government, but there are things that we can do as a council. And I'm pleased to say things like the council tax reduction scheme, maintaining that at 100%. And I have to say, I think that's really quite low key. It's a huge thing. But you'd only notice it, or the people that are getting it will only notice it if we didn't have it, or we have to reduce it or do away with it. We're the only ones doing it now. But it's doing things differently, but to address those things. And the innovation is really key. And how you do that, and it involves obviously risk management, start doing things differently, but we have got to do that differently. So it's just a point I wanted to make, and it is focal to this, but I'm really pleased with this document. It is a direction of travel. There will be things that we'll argue about or want to fine tune, but I think it's really good. Just a point I just wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I think a really important point delivered with passion. So thank you very much for that. Stephen, did I see your hand up there? Would you like to come in on that?
Just briefly, I think a really good point, well made. I would kind of argue that local government as a sector has been pretty successful at innovating over the last decade or so. You know, having to deal with a decade of austerity at the same, rising, reducing costs and funding from government at the same time that demand for services has been going up, and the complexity of the needs of the people we support also increasing has meant that we, like all councils, have had to innovate. But that's an ongoing process, isn't it? And that's, I think, clearly at the heart of our pathway to becoming a sustainable organisation. And the budget report, which will be discussed at Cabinet alongside the corporate plan, talks a lot about that and the need for us to continue to innovate, to continue to review and reform our services, because the behaviours of those we are supporting have changed, and some of that has been accelerated by COVID. I think you're right to say that this cross-system working is really, really important, and I think COVID has advanced cross-system working by years. And I think, we've shown by working together in Norfolk with other parts of the public sector, the voluntary sector, we've had such an amazing response to that, and community groups getting involved. There's an opportunity to build on that, and it's up to us not to squander that. And I think there's some really big opportunities there. We're working really closely with the NHS around health inequality. I'd point you towards the pathways homelessness response. There's a massive opportunity with integrated care systems coming, and the NHS are already talking to us about having co-located teams with some of our housing teams. So there are really big opportunities there to build on that platform of partnership working, which I think has been advanced quite significantly over the last 2 years.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Osborne, you're next, please.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a few sort of specific questions, but I've got also a couple of sort of more general points. So if I go to those first, if that's all right, so maybe I can come back with specific questions later on. Just picking up on what Councillor Thomas was just saying there about, and sort of implicit in the question was about the impact of drugs and antisocial behaviour, with people breaking down doors. Certainly we see that a lot in Mancroft. And I may have missed it, but I didn't see much in this corporate plan on drugs specifically. And I realise that Norwich City Council obviously isn't the public health authority, but it is a massive problem. I think we've got one of the highest drug-related death rates in the country, and county lines operating into Norwich. So just sort of raise that as something that I think needs to be addressed in the corporate plan. And similarly, antisocial behaviour has in the past been a big issue and has been one of the KPIs that's historically been sort of underperforming. And I know that the council's been taking action to try and improve that, but I'd like to see a continued focus on that. One specific question on that point is on page 19 of the report. It refers to developing and adopting a new community safety strategy and action plan and undertake a comprehensive review of service delivery model. And I'd be interested to know how that differs to what's been done before, because I know that, well, within the first year that I was elected, so between 2019 and 2020, the Safer Neighbourhoods Initiative was introduced, and Tim Bacon, who's done great work. But I wonder where are we going with that now, and how does this review differ from the previous reviews that have been done over the last 3 years? My other sort of broad general point, I don't want to come on to climate change in a minute, but my other general point is on public space, and it might seem a relatively minor issue, but it's a big issue for people in Mancroft, is graffiti, and how the public space is used. So certainly in the last year, we've seen a lot more graffiti in the city centre, but there's also plans from the county council, and I think city council officers have been working on them as well, to sort of improve public space through sort of the design of certain quarters in the city. And I'm wondering what the vision for public space in Norwich is, and how we use public art, for example, or what how we want people to feel in that space. And my third general point again is about climate change, just picking up on what Councillor Carlo said earlier. And I appreciate what Stephen says. I think there is more work to do to make sure that it is a cross-cutting issue, and that everything the council is doing is working towards that, because I still see a tension between economic interests and financial ones. For example, on the issue of car parks. So on page 24 of the report, it talks about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how I'm reading it, it talks about looking for alternative uses for car parks, including developing housing on them, which is something that Green Party councillors have been saying for a long time. But then on page 28, it implies that car parks will be maintained. And you can understand why, because the council relies on that income from car parks. And so that's one example of how the sort of economic interests of the council conflict with the environmental interests, and Anglia Square might be another example, or the allocation of resources in general. And there's economic strategy development. Obviously, we've not seen the new recast of the economic strategy, but the previous one, to be brutally honest, I don't think did enough to address climate change, and I will hope to see that it will do so much more in the new version. So the point, I guess, is that there is, I think I agree with Stephen about the way that the council's been restructured is important for dealing with climate change, but I think there's more work to be done to make sure that that actually happens.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Osborne, for those points there. Can I open up the floor to someone who'd like to come in and comment on those from officers, please?
I'm happy to comment on the final point. I might ask other colleagues to talk about ASB.
Yeah,
and...
before you carry on, can you try this out? I thought we were taking these in two separate bits.
That is the case, Councillor Driver. Unfortunately, Councillor Osborne missed our pre-meeting, and I did forget to tell him that, so I let that one go.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
I can respond in part to the final point, and I might ask colleagues to talk a bit more about ASB drugs and kind of the vision for the city and spaces. There's no getting away from the fact that there are clear tensions between economic, financial drivers and ambitions around climate change. It's no secret that a big part of the city council's budget is made up from income from car parks, and that's a necessity, because we do not have at the moment sufficient funding from all of the other sources that we have access to cover the cost of services. What I would say though is, so there's no getting away from that in the short term, and we recognise that. But I think what you've highlighted is precisely the corporate plan sets out a pathway, hopefully, for transitioning off reliance on car parks. And the fact that we've made reference to this in the corporate plan, it being our most strategic priority document, hopefully gives confidence that this is something we are serious about. But it needs to be done in a transitional way, and we need to look at how we can maximise income from other sources, and also kind of grow our way to sustainability in terms of supporting growth in the city. I would also, without repeating what was discussed at Cabinet, the council's clearly set out some an ambitious response to the Transport for Norwich strategy, which talks all about, I think, innovative ideas, proposals for reducing carbon emissions in the city. And I think that stands alongside the work we'll do in future around car parks. But there's no getting away those short-term tensions between economics and climate.
Thanks for that. I've got Graham Nelson with a hand up. So Graham, can I bring you in?
Thank you very much. I won't add anything to what Stephen's just said in relation to car parks and how we're doing that, but we are clearly going through a process that will take some time to get there, through looking actively at what alternate uses may be for some of those car parks in that wider taking the steer that's clearly set out in the corporate plan. The point I was going to come back was just some of the comments around public space that you've made. I do think this is already effectively referred to in various things that are ongoing and the corporate plan itself. As you pointed out, the look and feel of the city is key for its economic success and the ability for us to deliver the corporate plan in terms of making it a place for people to do business, people to feel comfortable being open and inclusive, etc. We work on a number of levels. Clearly, there's several proposals we have for investing in the assets that we own to keep them, welcoming, well invested, environmentally sustainable, etc. But particularly through Townsdale programme and through close working with county councils on things like the Transforming Cities Fund, we've got a programme of measures that are changing the look and feel of the city, gradually shifting to encourage more sustainable modes, improve air quality over time, etc., etc. But on top of that, it's not just about the sort of harder the measures that you might introduce like that. The quality of the space will be determined by your street cleaning regimes, how you manage graffiti, actually how people behave within the city to a certain extent. And there's a partnership approach is needed to address those matters, but certainly through the what we've done with establishing NCSL and bringing the environmental services into a wholly owned company effectively closer to the council gives us strategically more scope to influence the nature of how they discharge services, so it more closely reflects our corporate priorities and means that particularly the city centre is a space where people feel comfortable and can be effectively proud of. And allied to that is things like how we go about managing graffiti. We obviously during the course of the past year have done quite a bit to manage graffiti within the city. We've scrubbed it over. We work quite closely with the BID. There's murals which have previously been in locations where graffiti has been done, etc. And over the course of the next year or so, certainly there's probably a more active approach the council wants to take in terms of getting in, being effective in that space, because things like graffiti, particularly on some of the empty shops we unfortunately have, does become a problem that pulls down the city and the look and the feel of the place. So it's working with partnership and using the resources as best as we can to address those issues is something that is high on our agenda, and I think is it's a detailed matter, but it's something that I think follows through from the themes that are set out in the corporate plan.
Can I just come back on?
Yeah, please do.
James, I know Lou wants to come in, but and I appreciate that work is going on graffiti, and I've been talking to Andy Summers about that, and looking forward to more progress on that. might add on in terms of graffiti, also fly tipping and communal bins, which is obviously something that the fly tipping task and finish group is looking at. But my question, Graham, is about how residents are being involved in that, in the sort of, the look and the feel of the city. How are residents being consulted on that, engaged in it, participating in making that up from the council's point of view? Obviously, they're doing things at a community level already, but how is the council getting that feedback?
I mean, I think it's on multiple levels, isn't it? And it's very much depending on how, because it's several different things through interactions with the bid. It's when you're delivering major capital programs, there's formal periods of consultation. You've seen a lot of the stuff that's gone through the Transforming Cities Fund. There's formal consultation that's required. You've seen some of the emerging proposals that have come forward, have been implemented by that route, have actually changed quite substantially from initial schemes to how they've been implemented in the ground there. But yeah, I'd sort of take the point that when it comes to that softer level and that NCSL, how you manage it, where community engagement comes in, particularly in managing some of the green spaces. I think through some of the direct engagement for the communities, that space we can possibly work more intelligently in future. There's no hard and fast thing, but I think we're certainly willing, we're open for those conversations and working with community groups where it's appropriate to do so.
Thank you. Louise, can I bring you in, please?
Thank
Oh, you're muted.
Apologies for that. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Osborne. Your questions around antisocial behaviour and our focus on drugs and the impact of that in the city. As you say, quite rightly, we're not the lead agency around some of those areas, but I think that in the corporate plan, we've been really clear in that first aim, and particularly in the technical appendix around our priorities, around how we'll work really closely with our partners and access funding to deliver services that address those issues in a collective way. I think Stephen will probably have referred earlier to the restructuring of the council. That restructure brought all of those kind of front-facing key services around the people in our city together into my directorate, and you'll see there that there is a key activity around reviewing and transforming the way we deliver services, so that there's a bigger focus on the right support at the right time, that early intervention model. And some of that's described there as bringing together multidisciplinary teams around those areas that you've raised. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, that's the way that we're moving towards working already with some of our health partners, mental health teams and support workers around how we might work more closely and do that work together. In terms of the antisocial behaviour area, in terms of that review, you'll be aware, and we've had many conversations with all of you here about, we've got some areas of the service that are working well, and you talk about the good work done under the Safer Neighbourhoods Initiative, and we've got some areas where we want to do that full and thorough review of those services, and bring that into that review of the way that we work, the whole way that we deliver the services. So I hope that makes it a bit clearer. That's what that is.
Thanks. Yeah, I understand that. I don't know if it's a question or just an observation, is that certainly in the time that I've been a councillor, that seems to have been the perpetual state of the antisocial behaviour team, that there's been a sort of constant, we need to review this whole service, and that's been 3 years now. And I know that you're working on it, Lou, but I'm just putting that out there.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, you're next, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to everyone that's presented. It's really interesting. It's really good to see this plan, and there's some excellent progress in it that we're very, very glad to see. In forward, Stephen, you say the climate emergency will continue to frame everything we do. And I want to ask about two things really. One, just to get this out of the way first, because I think it is the most important. It's that the corporate plan is bigger now. It's going, I mean, it's longer. It's going to go to 2026. I mean, by 2026, we're going to be well on the way to 2030, where we really need to have halved our emissions by. So we are in an emergency situation here. And I think this has been pointed out a couple of times. The corporate plan is kind of missing an opportunity in its structure to reflect that, I think. And I wonder if we can do, so my question really to officers and to yourself and to the leader really, it's not really a societal preoccupation, it's a crisis for all of us. So we need to find a way to reflect that crisis and make this plan able so that it looks like it's dealing with it, because I don't think this plan actually looks any different to how the last corporate plan looked at it, or maybe a little bit, but not much. I'm not asking the plan to only be about that, but really that does underpin the challenge of life going forward for all of us. And the City Council can be a leader in that area. So I just want to ask that question. How today do you think we could actually, without obviously doing a massive restructure, I'm not asking for that, I know at this stage that's very difficult, and I'm completely aware, as indeed the author of plans like this myself, that it's very difficult to make everything geared to work, to sort of have loads of different priorities all at once, and cross-cutting things are very hard to, but can we see a way to just foreground this challenge more into the way this plan looks, into the way it's engineered, so that otherwise it's going to be a bit obsolete by 2026. It's going to be, why was this funny little phrase in here about the climate crisis? It is going to be a priority. It is a cross-cutting theme, and you've both acknowledged that. So that's my question about the climate element of it. I'm aware that we're pushing on that, but that's because I think it's very necessary for all of us. And the other thing I wanted to raise, I think, is an area that perhaps needs just a few questions, is how people have been involved in producing the plan. So I know, thank you, Ramona. I think you did receive some questions from us or from me, and I did ask these in them, but I haven't. I think I just wanted to give you foresight of that line of questioning, and it's really saying there was a staff consultation for the staff about the plan, and how has the result of that consultation been put in? How have people in Norwich been able to influence this plan? I mean, and you might say, well, that's through the democratically elected councillors. In that case, how have councillors that aren't on cabinet been able to play their part? I know we are sitting here today, but and I'm grateful for the chance, and I know you are listening to what we say, but how can we make sure that the plan is co-created? So is there anything we can add at this element to show that, to reflect in the plan that it was co-created? Can we have a little bit about how that was done? Thanks.
Thank you for those questions and comments. Who can I bring in to pick those up, please?
Could I just start? One of the features of our work as administration and as a council has been partnership working. And what we know, and I think what we are saying in this document is describing the things that we can have a direct responsibility over, but we always want those to be informed by the aspirations of people in the city and the external challenges, and the things that our other partners, our lead partners, are able to most effectively deal with. So the co-creation side of things, in terms of the ambition of delivering the corporate plan, which reflects the work of the 2040 Vision Partnership, which has now been running in its fourth year, and the recovery plan, which again puts a heavy stress on working with partners to get the resources and the policies that we need for the city to meet the needs of the city, are all about co-creation. And the point that Graham made earlier on about, horses for courses in terms of consultation around particular projects, around infrastructure, around our strategy, our ambitious strategy for transport for Norwich, and so on, are also part of that. I think the problem for me, in terms of the points that are raised, which are all valid points, is the fact that there has to be a transition. So there is a climate crisis. Actually, there's a cost of living crisis, which is what people are living through now. There are a number of different crises interlinked, it would seem to me, that we have to play our part in trying to mitigate and turn and put into a more benign channel to meet some of the real very difficult challenges that people in this city are facing. But there has to be a transition. There has to be in some of the points that are raised in this document, it's on the map. The work is being done. The links are being made. And I think what has been maybe a difference of philosophy sometimes within the council has been, the interlinking and the intimate connections between environment, social, and economic, and to make those work in a harmonious and effective way to meet the challenges that we all know exist. So I suppose it's easy to say, well, we don't want car parks. So if we said tomorrow, we're not having car parks, we're stopping car parks, we know what the consequences would be. Not just in terms of income to the council, but the ability of people to get into the city. Now, if we don't want car parks, we want better public transport. And yet, public transport, there are no fewer buses because of COVID, because we have a model of private sector provision of buses with public subsidy. So we have a problem in that respect. There's a whole number of ramifications, some of which we can work to address ourselves by making the city a place where people don't use car parks, they walk, they cycle, and sometimes there's a chance they might be able to get a bus which gets them to work on time. And we can do those things and we can work with those other partners. But what we can't do is simply jump from one place to another, as it were, immediately. Some of the questions you've asked Jamie, some that you've asked Lucy. That if you were the administration and you wanted to get to those places, you could have a choice about closing car parks if you wanted. I doubt if you would do it because you knew there would need to be a transition. Where is the great slug of money that we need from central government to put in charging points? Well, what I've been reading is that government is woefully falling short in that area. So just in my mind, we need to acknowledge what we can do. We need to acknowledge that we are ambitious, but we also need to acknowledge that we are working in an extraordinarily difficult context of which we are not in sole control over. Yet we work to show that there is an alternative, which we would encourage people then to reflect in the way they vote and the governments that they choose. So I just feel it needs to be framed. There just needs to be some acknowledgement of that.
Thank you. Any officers want to pick up any of Councillor Galvin's points? Stephen.
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to respond to on a couple of levels, really. So within our control, I think what the corporate plan sets out, and I think what a wider set of kind of policies we've developed set out is a clear ambition around climate change and reducing emissions from, as I say, our response to the Transport for Norwich strategy. The commitments we've made around housing and building to the highest possible levels of environmental quality, our track record in cutting emissions from our own estate, 60% reduction, our ambitions now to work with the City Vision Group and businesses to develop a climate reduction strategy for the city, and the creation of the Norwich Climate Change Commission. There are other things. I think as an approach, I think that's, for a local authority, is a pretty good set of ambitions. Taking the kind of wider viewpoint, COP26 has been and gone. I haven't heard much on the news recently about climate change. I haven't heard the government talk much about climate change recently. I think the comprehensive spending review was disappointing in terms of what it set out for a response to climate change at a national level. I think the sector, local government as a sector, has shown it can deliver. And so the government can continue to kind of scratch around at the edges, or it can really use its leverage to put the resources that's needed to really make a significant response to this and devolve more powers and funding to local government. So I think at a local level, you know, we've got a set of ambitions and a set of responses which I think show that we are making progress. But I do think our role collectively as a sector and individually as a city council is to continue to push government to push this up the priority list.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Interestingly enough, on COP26 and the climate issues there, I tuned in and watched PMQs yesterday. I think prior to that, Alok Sharma was taking questions on it, and it was interesting to see the push that was needed from opposition MPs to try and get something out of the government on that versus some of the concerns expressed by Tory MPs about why we were worrying about this climate business. So it's an interesting position, I think, where it sits with central government at the moment. If there's no further comments on that particular piece from officers, Councillor Galvin, I'll then bring you back.
Thank you. Thank you for those responses. I just wanted to say, Councillor Waters, you say that it's we can't make that jump. We can't suddenly shut car parks. I totally understand that. I want to say that's what the corporate plan's for. It's to make this transition. That's why we've got a plan through to 2026, so we don't have to suddenly do stuff. So I'd like to just see it more foregrounded in there, and I'm slightly disappointed really by the. I want it to be more than pretty good. I want it to really take this on. And if we wait around for the government to do this, we'll wait a long, long time. So yeah, that's my responses to those really. Thanks.
Well, that will be, I guess, a dividing point between us. I think this is an ambitious document, well grounded in actions that will move us forward over that period. And I think I'm just linking it to one other point that you made, which was, well, climate change may be by 2026, or the language we're using now may be less relevant in 2026, but it's just a reminder that every year we update the corporate plan and the priorities to reflect changing circumstances. So it's never been a sort of a document that's static and waits until its end date. It's always been a document which is refreshed, and as on this occasion has been completely rewritten, though carrying forward as one would some of the key policies that will help us achieve some of the objectives that we both believe need to be achieved over the period.
James, you're on mute.
I realised I was muted. Councillor Fulton-McAllister, you've been waiting a while with your virtual hand up, so over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I was just going to ask Alan or Stephen, presumably this corporate plan has been in progress for a good number of months. In those months, we've actually seen a lot worse news on the state of the impending cost of living crisis. And I think this is probably what Norwich residents will look back at this meeting and be most concerned by. Obviously, a lot of people have already had their bills increased by more than 50%, meaning that a lot of households in Norwich are paying more than £1,500 a every year for their energy, whereas previously the average was about £1,000. We know that we've got a good track record on trying to protect the poorest from having to bear the brunt of the cost of living crisis through the mechanisms available to us, such as through the council tax reduction scheme and other schemes. We've set up our own white label energy company, Raw Power. I'd like to see a little bit more within this document about how we as a council are going to protect people from the cost of living crisis that a lot of people will be experiencing come April this year. We expect that the Tories will be going on the attack over a lot of additional what they call green taxes on our energy bills. These are additional levies that everybody in this meeting agrees with. However, to ensure there is still public support for them, which is important, we do need to tackle the cost elements that people will be suffering from. And I just wondered what, as a council, we would be doing, because I think this report could do with a little bit more focus on that, given it's obviously been in progress a good number of months and the cost of living crisis wasn't necessarily as obvious back then.
Thank you for that, Councillor Fulton McAllister. Who can I bring in for comment on that?
So, very, very good points, Matthew. But I have to say, I think there's been a cost of living crisis for many people in this city, for 2 or 3 decades, actually. And it's become more acute probably since the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, and then the austerity programme, which decided that it was people on low incomes who were responsible for the financial crash. And there's been an erosion in, as you know better than I, in terms and conditions of employment, and in terms of the growth of flexible working, which means people have got insecure incomes. So, you know, the government is clearly going to do something in April to try and mitigate things, but it will be a sticking plaster. I think Liberal Democrat motion to council next week makes references to sticking plasters, or I picked it up somewhere. So it would seem to me that there is. I think we could exemplify a whole list of things that we're doing as mitigants. And from my point of view, I've always felt that anti-poverty strategies, unless you don't break the back of poverty until you get, as a priority, people into decently paid, secure work and a decent social security system. And there are a number of things the government could do with its welfare. It could reverse many of the welfare cuts that it made over the last decade. And that would give people some financial resilience over the cost of living crisis. It could, and this would enable us to be even more ambitious of our corporate plan, reintroduce the revenue support grant, which was an equalisation grant, reflecting the needs of different communities and the challenges of low tax bases and so on, of which Norwich is one example. So, there really needs to be, and we need to persuade government that there are ways in which they can help people through this crisis. And I think, I think we're working at the optimum of what we're able to do, but we keep pushing that and we keep getting additional grants. I mean, retrofitting grants will make a difference to some people in terms of their financial bottom line when it comes to energy costs. But if the point is that we need to kind of crystallise these things in a more prominent way, then that's something worth looking at.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was saying. If the report could, because we speak a lot about the importance of the jobs, but we don't necessarily link it to this being the best way to tackle the cost of living crisis for people, and just crystallising that would be helpful, I think. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thank you. We've got 4 virtual hands up. Councillors Osborne, Huntley, Driver and Giles. Between Councillor Huntley and Driver, we have Councillor Galvin, whose hand I noted. So, Councillor Osborne, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. You went a bit. Your voice was quite muffled there, so I don't know if you want to. If there's anything wrong with your microphone there. But thanks.
How is this now? Is it still muffled?
Yeah, it's sort of very distorted.
Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah, just to pick up on what Councillor Waters said earlier in response to Lucy, Councillor Galvin. I appreciate what you say, Alan, about it needing to be a transition. I suppose what I would say in response to that is about the urgency of that transition. And I know that, it's a very difficult situation, but it's now 3 years since Norwich City Council declared a climate emergency. And we're only just getting going with the Climate Commission. Obviously, it's a great thing that that's happening, but it's been 3 years. We've only got 8 years left until that 2030 date, which is when a massive amount of the emissions cuts has to happen. It's been 3 years of trying to work out how to reduce car park provision. It's been 3 years where we're trying to work out how to retrofit council housing stock and get housing stock across the city retrofitted. And I appreciate that it's a difficult situation, but there has to be some level of urgency in this, both on that and on the cost of living crisis that Matthew raised, which is a very valid point as well. Just picking up on what Stephen said about the sort of the fact that government isn't stepping up to these challenges, either of retrofitting housing or climate crisis or the cost of living crisis. Something that Lewis District Council and other councils in that region are doing is working together to pool their housing or HRA revenue, HRA capital budgets, sorry, to retrofit housing across their several councils, which is a way of getting a big amount of money. I think they've got something like £1 billion to retrofit 40,000 council homes over the next few years. So that could have a massive impact. And they're also leading by setting up a retrofit task force with local industry, renewable energy industry, construction industry, further and higher education and vocational training institutions to actually boost the jobs market or the skills and supply chain for retrofit. And that's the kind of local leadership that we need to be seeing from councils, filling the gap where government is not stepping in to address both the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis. So is that something that Norwich is looking at doing? And again, Green Council has been saying that for a while.
So, is my mic any better?
Yes, it is.
It is, good. I use the opportunity of you speaking, Councillor Osborne, to play with some settings. So, over to anyone who would like to pick up on Councillor Osborne's comments, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come in. Thank you for that, Councillor Osborne. And yes, we are aware of some really good initiatives that are happening across the country around pooling resources, pooling skills and expertise to tackle, what is a significant challenge, and especially for us when we're looking at our own stock numbers. We've got a large number of homes to look at. We've laid out in the corporate plan a number of areas where we're going to pick up the retrofitting work. You will be aware that MPS services are coming back to the council in April, and we will be moving forward, looking at our strategy for doing this. We've highlighted in the plan that we want to look at the specification for new build to ensure that, you know, we keep ourselves at the status quo. We don't make the retrofitting challenge bigger for ourselves. So where we're building new, we need to make sure that's the right standard. We've highlighted a new asset management strategy for our own homes. We've talked about a carbon management reduction plan. And also we've highlighted a review of the HRA business plan. And that's where we will begin to look at those investment, I think the capacity, our investment capacity, our priorities, and how we allocate the funding in the right way to do that. And you know, Councillor Waters mentioned a bit earlier the Climate Commission and those other partnerships that we're working through to try and pull together some of those mechanisms to help us deliver.
Thank you for that. Councillor Huntley, you're next, please.
Thank you there, Chair. I welcome what's stated in Aim 5 to improve access to services and make it easier things to be done online. I wondered what alternatives will be put in place for those experiencing or facing digital poverty.
Who can I bring in here? Stephen, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is we will always retain alternative means of access for people who can't access digitally. You know, the vast majority of Norwich residents should and will be able to do that, but we absolutely acknowledge and recognise that not everyone can. So in terms of our customer contact and our customer services, there will always be an opportunity to have face-to-face appointments. And people will always be able to get in touch with us over the phone, as well as, you know, a range of our services that work on the basis of outreach. So yes, you know, for reasons of convenience for our residents and businesses, and, you know, efficiencies for the council, we want to, where appropriate, transition as many of our services as possible online. We will always retain those alternative routes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Waters.
And just briefly to add, myself and Ramona were at the Good Economy Commission session this morning, and there's been a major piece of work undertaken on digital inclusion, and that touches on, among other things, for example, people's financial ability to be able to afford the cost of installing, but also the opportunity to be able to carry out the financial transactions to buy that equipment if they could, with, you know, a large number of people in the city not having bank accounts. So there have been 5 pieces of pilot work which will be brought together in the spring, later in the spring, as a part of a significant plank of that. The recommendations of the Good Economy Commission, which has been built on those pilot schemes to increase progress. But Jake's point is well made. I think all of us as councillors, certainly my experience, are finding that we're dealing with more and more complex casework, and so that is not easy to do as a transactional exercise using sort of digital means. That does require face-to-face work and opportunity. And I think, you know, one of the strands in this strategy, which talks about an organisation fit for the delivery of this corporate plan and being effective in terms of responding to people, you know, reflects the need to be able to act as an organisation which can deal with that complexity alongside enabling people to access services and support through digital means, and for a wider group of people to be able to do that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, you are next, please.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I just had a few questions about points on page 16. And just to reiterate my question from before, which I don't think was answered, was how were councillors involved as representatives of communities. Obviously, that's really important, how a councillor is involved in drafting this, but we can come to that. I wanted to suggest, it does link to this, aim 1, the 4th point is listen to our communities and use their views in our decision making. I wanted to ask where participatory budgeting comes in this. I know that it was recently agreed to go forward with participatory budgeting, and I wanted to suggest that perhaps the wording there is slightly infelicitous. It maybe might be worth saying, listen to our communities and use their views in decision making. So that's one suggestion I'd make. I'd like thoughts on that. And the second suggestion is in aim 2. It says work with partners to move towards sustainable transport and improved air quality. It seems it would be nice to have a slightly more stretching target, perhaps to increase sustainable transport and improve air quality. I know that you could say these are just words, but I think that's what corporate plan is. It needs to be accurate in its wording and to be ambitious in its wording. So they were 2 things I'd just like to ask your thoughts on, whether we might do that going forward. So how are councillors involved? Does participatory budgeting feature in this corporate plan? Can we change those 2 sets of wording? Thanks.
Thank you. If I can get some comments on that. Ramona, thank you, please.
Yes, so in terms of how councillors have been involved, I think as it's set out in the scrutiny paper, we have been working with Alan as the portfolio holder. It's now come to you as scrutiny. It will then go to cabinet, and then it will go to full council, which I understand is generally the process for corporate plans in previous years. On participatory budgeting, it's not mentioned specifically in the wording of the plan. It is, I understand, part of the citizen participation strategy, which is being developed. And on specific wording changes, I understand that the scrutiny committee needs to decide to make recommendations to cabinet on things, including specific wording changes. Sorry.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you for that. That's great. So can I put forward that we make that those are potential recommendations for those? I don't know if you caught them, if Lucy caught what I said there, or if anyone. But anyway, there's some draft ideas, just quite small things to. And I'm glad to hear that participatory budgeting is going to be in that strategy. I just make the point that being involved by seeing it when it's finished, almost finished like this, isn't. It worries me. It's not as democratic as it could be in terms of us having earlier input, and that brings me on to another question actually that is linked to that, which is that it doesn't really mention in here what would happen if the local government system changed, which I think is potentially a possibility. So I wonder the review process that would need to be gone through to address, big outlying threats like that. Is there a review process detailed anywhere in here? I know it says it's reviewed every year, but I'd just like to know, how is it reviewed every year? Thanks.
Thank you for that. Who wants to pick up on the how? Councillor Galvin. Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, it's reviewed every year as part of our annual business planning process. So our process which combines our priority setting and our budget. So this is a kind of multi-year plan, but every year we refresh. I think the leader does a refreshed forward, and we also look at whether we need to change any of the measures and the KPIs, and also we would do an update on delivery against those targets in the delivery section. I mean, your specific point about local government reorganisation, let's see what the white paper says whenever that's published. I have to say that if that were to happen, we'd probably be in the realms of a brand new corporate plan by the time that did happen. So I think there'll be plenty of time to factor that into future versions. But I think there is a kind of tried and tested way of refreshing this every year.
Thank you for that, Graham.
Thank you. I was just going to comment. Councillor Galvin made a couple of specific points about the aims and particularly how it's described to deliver those particular things under it, particularly highlighting the transport and proposal there that's down there. And what I just comment is clearly there's a way that these have been written deliberately, and it's quite it's quite straightforward in terms of how it's been written. So they're written so they're being short effectively and highlighting the particular issue rather than sort of expressing the scale of it. And I'm just thinking, so you look at, for instance, the issue about Norwich working with partners to move towards sustainable transport and improved air quality, feels you could sit there and criticise it for potentially lacking some ambition in terms of how that is expressed, because particularly where we've been in terms of considering recently the Norwich Transport Strategy, it's clear that the council recognises there's actually a really significant need to quite radically change the way people move about the city over time. And one of the things that will result in is a really very significant improvement to air quality in parts of the city centre, where there's a growing recognition of what that does to people's quality of life, particularly, and issues of life expectancy. But I'm just wondering, I think there's a danger in terms of micromanaging it and trying to write through the detail of each of those without looking across the piece, because actually the fact that that issue of sustainable transport and air quality is flagged up is a recognition that actually this is one of a very limited number of aims and objectives and things that we will do under it to keep the whole strategy and corporate plan readable and focused. The fact that it's in there carries a degree of emphasis already, and I'm not sure that necessarily micromanaging the particular wording to add it emphasis on particular ones of these would be the smartest thing to do at this stage. You certainly would need to look across the entirety of it and think whether you need any more description about any of the other things to avoid imbalancing the strategy.
Thank you for those comments, Graham. I'll now move on to Councillor Driver, who has his hand up.
Thank you. I was waiting to get my answer to the first question, what was asked tonight, with Alan trying to find his papers. So I was waiting for that to come back. So I was hoping I was going to get that. But just one other, I hope you can answer, Alan. But the other question is our vision for the council. Have you seen the documents from the other councils around the Norwich area, Portland, South Norfolk and stuff like that, their corporate plan? And do you think there's anything in their corporate plans will stop us as a district council going ahead with our plan and everything is hunky-dory and nothing will mix and nothing will change? I mean, climate change, I mean, go from one council to another council, I mean, they should be the same, but I can't see other councils putting anything in about climate change and stuff. So I was just a bit worried about there may be something South Norfolk or Portland or which might affect us in Norwich.
Thank you for that, Councillor Driver.
Right. Stephen had his hand up first. I mean, he knows the Norfolk chief executives well. I can answer it from a political point of view. Every time we have a Norfolk leaders gathering, periodically we do. One of the things we share in common, climate change, challenges of climate change have come through very strongly. So we know, for example, the Norfolk County Council have got a carbon zero strategy that they're aiming for 2030, and all other councils to varying degrees will be saying the same thing, because we can't just achieve climate change. What we can in terms of air quality in the city and things like that, and making it a pleasant environment to move around, but in terms of the really significant challenges that climate change threaten, particularly this part of the country, with the things that we're going to have to do together. And I don't think there are any climate denying leaders of the councils in Norfolk. None I've come across. one or two have skirted a bit close on occasion, but I think we're on the same page. So I don't think there'll be an impediment around that. But if I link it back to the point that Lucy had made about if we had a restructuring of local government and we had a single council, let's say, for the whole of Norfolk, the question is where would the priorities be in terms of meeting the particular needs of the city in a largely rural area? So, you know, I think one of the reasons why we are members of the Key Cities group is because there's, among that group of 25 cities, there are cities, you know, of a similar size to our own, or slightly larger, slightly smaller, where we can share the good practice around many of the issues that this corporate plan covers. It's often, you know, looking at other cities and their corporate plans where we can draw down ideas or share ideas because they share similar characteristics.
Thank you. Shall I bring Stephen in now?
Did Alan want to ask my first question about those 5 points on page 13 and 14? And do you think they're big enough, or should they be expanded a bit? You're muted, Alan.
So let me just get this right. So whether I've got the same numeration as you, is it the page 17 of 38 number you're looking at, or are you looking at the single number 9, 10, or 11?
Number 7. We're looking at page 7, which is minus 13 of 38. It's under the Norwich 2046 vision and our 5 objectives: a creative city, non-criminal city.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, do you think they're blunt? Do you think they're too blunt, or do you think they should be expanded a bit to explain a little bit more? I heard what Graham then said about other bits in there, that the points are there, and just because it's only a small point, we will expand on it later. But it seemed to me those 5 main points could have been a little bit bigger.
Well, I think what's happened in practice is that they are broad enough. They create a sort of a big enough tent for everybody to bring their contributions to. I think that's been a very effective means of people feeling comfortable being part of the partnership. And in my experience, everything that people have brought to the table, first of all, they tell us about what they're doing. So we actually learn a lot about good practice. And it's been reassuring that everybody is thinking about issues like climate change and issues like poverty and issues about skills and, you know, the needs of housing and so on and so forth. So I think it's broad enough, but within that, there are a lot of, there's a series of streams of work which are aimed at delivering, you know, those broad objectives. So I think it is the right description to make effective partnerships to deliver ambitious plans.
Thumbs up from Councillor Driver there. Councillor Giles, please, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. My question was going to be about the government's so-called levelling up agenda. It was obviously revealed yesterday that the East of England has received 40% less levelling up funding than other regions in the UK. And my question is relating to what impact is this likely to have on Norwich and Norfolk, and are we going to miss out on the vital jobs and industries of the future by not getting this funding? Is the distinction the government is making between the North and the South too arbitrary, and are they overlooking the structural inequality issues that we've had for a long time in Norfolk around low social mobility, poor educational attainment and poor infrastructure? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Who'd like to pick that up? Councillor Waters?
Yeah, I think the problem is there's not enough money in the Levelling Up Fund. I think Stephen might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think something like £4.6 billion was put aside in the comprehensive spending review. I know that a working group led by Andy Haldane, who formerly worked for the Bank of England, reckoned, looking at levelling up, reckons you need £1 trillion. You think about how much money's been sucked out and how much deindustrialisation's gone on, and the drop off in investment. We're seeing signs of that post Brexit. When East and West Germany, when West Germany decided to level up East Germany when they united, they spent €2 trillion to do it. So frankly, the scale, that it is going to disappoint. It is going to disappoint. And, point has been made on many occasions that actually everybody has got areas which need investment. Even the relatively rich southeast, needs resources. The east of England needs resources. North of England needs it. But, as I say, you would need something of a massively much more ambitious scale, reflecting the needs of different communities, than what will be, frankly, a paltry sum of money.
I want to just add on that, picking up on Councillor Waters' point, even at €2 trillion for Germany, the levelling up still never really happened. The East has always felt that it was behind that from the West. So, does anyone else have any would like to come in on the points from Councillor Giles? The other officers.
If you don't mind,
yeah.
If you don't mind me sort of commenting briefly, I'll clearly steer clear of some of the political points around it, but we still don't really know what the levelling up agenda is going to mean in practice. We're due a white paper fairly shortly, and clearly it's going to be quite high on our list of priorities to understand that, because one thing that we have been able to do as a city, this leaves aside the wider regional questions that I think Councillor Giles raised about East Anglia or the east of England generally losing out on that, clearly through the activity that we're able to take through the Towns Fund, we were able to move relatively quickly. So compared to other places, we not only were able to get a bid into government comparatively quickly, but that bid was very successful in terms of levering the maximum amount of money out of the government that was available through that funding mechanism. So even if at a regional level you feel that we may be being overlooked, I think from our point of view, the key thing is to make sure that Norwich itself is seen as an investable proposition, is seen as a place that will deliver, will galvanise, will get behind, will be able to move, and has a really clear idea of its priorities to turn the city around and to address the real evident inequality and issues that lie within the city. And just to come back and relate it back to the corporate plan, effectively through the city vision and the work that has been done over the past 4 or 5 years of getting an ongoing dialogue with communities, key stakeholders, businesses, other public sector organisations, we have a really firm footing across the city on which we've got an agreed set of priorities. We know where we come from. So where funding opportunities come along, we have a cohort of willing organisations to work with us to shape it, so we exploit those opportunities as best as we can as a city. So whatever the regional position is, it comes down to the nitty gritty, and frankly us being able to put forward and make Norwich seem an attractive proposition for any investment that is available from government. Certainly some of our strategic positioning has been quite successful over that, and that's what hopefully comes through the corporate plan as one thing that we need to be able to do to position ourselves.
Thank you for that. Denise, Councillor Carlo, you're next with a question, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yes, a couple of KPIs, please. Page 21, reference to percentage of people responding as feeling safe in local area survey, and 60% seems to me pretty low. And then secondly, page 22, the review of the waste strategy, and then 23 gives the KPI percentage of household waste sent for reuse, recycling and composting, and that is a figure of 40%. Firstly, it seems to suggest that the KPI has been set before the waste strategy review. And secondly, the KPI is really quite low. And I think at the moment it's 37%. And then I think under the Environment Act, councils have got to collect food waste from flats. But nonetheless, a 3% increase is really very modest. So if what the review is going to look at could be clarified, please, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And those page numbers related to the report page numbers rather than the agenda pack page numbers, just for clarification there. Ramona, can I bring you in then? Graham, please.
Well, I was just going to respond on the waste target because somebody from Graham's team had come back to me on that. Thank you to Councillor Carlo for pointing out you were likely to ask it. But Graham obviously has a much more understanding of this than I do. So I don't know, Graham, if you want to talk about it from a practical experience.
I'm quite happy for you to have the first go. I'd seen some updated information today, but if you deal with it first, I'll follow up.
Okay, so basically the plan is to retain the existing KPI until the new waste strategy is agreed later this year, which is going to include consideration of what KPIs should be in this area. But we felt that it's such an important area that we shouldn't not have a KPI at all in the interim. So that is the rolling over the KPI that we already had, essentially.
Yeah, I think all I would add to that is that having just seen the latest performance information for where we are, we've been falling short on our waste, and it's been below 40% for the last number of quarters. When we come through with the latest performance monitoring, you'll see for quarter 3 that should indicate that for the first quarter in a while we've been just able to tip over that 40% level.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd seen Councillor Galvin's hand up, real hand up first, and then it's Councillor Driver with his artificial hand after that. Thank you.
Oh, his artificial hand, that sounds a bit strange. Yes, I'm going to try to get a recommendation because I failed to get anything big changed. I failed to get words changed, but can I just suggest that if these KPIs aren't actually real KPIs like that one we just had, I suggest that's noted on there. So you could put an asterisk and just have so if it's actually a stand-in KPI and it is going to be changed, then it's worth having it in there because that makes it a living real document, doesn't it? That's actually reflecting reality, which is more helpful to everyone. I wanted to ask on page 20, as we're onto these now then, so would it be all right to ask a quick question on these?
Yes, please do, yeah.
Thank you. So on, it says on page 22, it's got work with partners to improve access to and enjoyment of the rivers. I'd say it would be good to name the rivers. And can we amend it to include water quality and biodiversity to access and improve and enjoyment? On page 23, the percentage reduction of CO2 emissions is 3%. I just wondered what that figure represents. And why it's so low. And page 23 again, private sector insulation measures 50 quarterly. Just what's that based on, and can it be increased? Is it possible to, as Graham was saying, we want this plan to show that we're an investable proposition. There will be funding coming for this area. It's no doubt the government will eventually start to send money percolating through. So is it possible to have targets that will make us investable from that point of view? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ramona, your hands up, please.
Yes, on the river,
You've gone mute.
Sorry. On the river one, this is actually one that came up as needing clarification from staff comments as well. So I've just pasted into the chat the updated wording, which hopefully I think is coming from a similar place about being clearer and talking about not just access and enjoyment, but also the natural, historic and cultural environment of the River Wensum corridor. So just to let you know, that's part of the parallel process I was talking about earlier.
So, as for anyone watching this on YouTube, you won't be able to see the chat. So the revised wording reads: work with partners to improve access to and enjoyment of the River Wensum, and protect and enhance the natural, historic and cultural environment of River Wensum corridor. Councillor Galvin.
Sorry. Yeah, just now we've lost the other rivers, though. That's the only thing. So just to make sure that it's reflecting that there's more than one river in Norwich, I believe.
On your other 2 points, Councillor Galvin, I've had some responses from colleagues. So in terms of the CO2 emissions, this is about yearly reporting of reductions in CO2 emissions, including contractor reporting. So I think that, as Stephen was saying, our emissions as a council have decreased by 71% since 2008, which obviously makes it more difficult each year to make those reductions. So which is why it's been set at that level, as a level of ambition that the team feels is pushing us forward, but is achievable. On the private sector installation measures, this is a mixture of all the measures in the city that the council plays a part in. So loft and cavity wall installation measures via our Cosy City scheme, small scale measures handed out at community events, solar installations via the Solar Together scheme. As it's been put in as a KPI based on the team's assessment of where we are, obviously they feel it has been set at the right level. So I think if the Scrutiny Committee wanted to recommend it was changed, that would be something for Cabinet to consider.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Driver, please.
Yeah, mine's in with the next bit of the report. Since I've been a councillor over 20 years now, every time we get these reports come in with percentages and targets and key performance indicators, I've always asked for what they were, and we can have a look at what they were and what we're projecting, so we can see if we're trying to make an increase in the city and get better each year, or something's happened major and we've gone a lot worse. Now, I can't tell the difference between one or the other because I haven't got the other figures in front of me at the moment, and that would take too much time to find all these up, where in this document here, I believe we should have the targets in there, say 66% on planning decisions, stuff like that, Councillor One, or, you know, or how many of this, but we should have a figure there to tell us what it was. So that's a recommendation I would like to put in, that when we have these performance documents come out, that we actually have what the figures were before, so we can understand if we're achieving something as a city or we're actually falling down. I believe we are improving on most of the ones I've read and understand. But can I just ask one on page 19, the number of new homes, both council and private, completed 477 homes per year. Can I ask whether, is that the figure that we're already done, or is this what we're going to achieve by 2022, 23? And did you get that, where did that figure come from? Because on page 17, where we're looking at 4,000 new homes in the east, we're looking at Angus Square coming in, we're looking at about 200 new homes on Mall Cross. That 477 figure don't add up to me, so I just wondered, where did that come from?
Would you like me to pick up the answer to that?
Yes, please.
Okay, the straightforward, where 477 came from is the figure in the current adopted local plan effectively. So it derives from the monitoring targets in the joint core strategy, clearly adopted some time ago. So that's where that has come from. As you point out, we've got some real big ambitions in terms of growth in the city and also around it. What we find particularly in the city is the growth tends to be very lumpy. Effectively to do it, so the annual target tends to be relatively low because sometimes you struggle to achieve that on certain occasions. And one of the things that was flagged up in the last annual monitoring report was that the pandemic had a particularly bad effect on a number of construction sites in the city, so many of which shelved, and we had very low rates of delivery. So at the moment we're under that target, but where we've been in the past is when the construction market is working and you're able to get away development in the city, the annual rates of delivery can be substantially over that. So it's not that long ago we were delivering well over 1,000 units a year across the city, and that makes big difference. It's hard to express an annual target in that way, and I dare say the 477 homes a year will need to be reflected once the work on the Greater Norwich local plan goes through. So probably by the time, I guess it's going to be next year by the time the council formally adopts the plan, but I would imagine that target, which is of course a minimum, will need to be kept under review at that stage.
Okay, and is there any indication that we think 477 is enough? I believe that we should try and achieve more, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
that's where I want the other figures to be put in what they were last time.
Yeah, of course. Well, that if you put it back, that was the figure that's in the current plans, effectively, because that's based on the information that's coming through the was through the joint core strategy. If you want to increase, it's difficult to increase that without being able to evidence where you're going to deliver them from. And whilst there are some big figures associated with East Norwich, that crosses boundaries, not necessarily all in the city. And even if there's a large figure of 3,500, 4,000 homes might be able to deliver on those really sustainable brownfield sites, you get into complex issues around the speed at which you can deliver them. So it becomes, when it expresses into an annual rate, it's harder to come up with that meaningful target. Again, it's a minimum level that we're always trying to exceed, because both in terms of the private need and the need for affordable housing, there's an awful lot of unmet housing needs in the city. So we do need to keep the pressure on and try and deliver those things.
Okay, and a recommendation about having the other figures put in later documents?
So the language that I've been given for that, Councillor Driver, is include previous KPIs in performance documents to understand if the council is achieving its targets.
Sounds good to me.
So I'll bring in Stephen, please. Now.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think what we do, obviously, when the new corporate plan is adopted, we take quarterly reports to cabinet on performance, and we'll show direction of travel against those targets. But given this is a new, given this is a new corporate plan, some of these are new KPIs and new performance measures, so they won't, in all cases, link to previous ones. But I think we could consider through the annual refresh just kind of doing a bit of comparison from, if they do change, how that's changed from the previous year.
Thank you for that. I've got a question myself. On page 20 of the agenda, 13 of this item, it talks about implementing a private renters charter. I'm interested as to why we've set a date of December 2025 at the very end of the lifespan of this corporate plan for doing something which seems so important for the many private renters that live in our city. So I wonder if I can just get some understanding as to what the barriers are to implementing that sooner, really. Thank you.
I could come in here
Liz.
a point of detail, although again, there are people who are far more expert than me in the meeting. Just to say, this was another piece of wording where the staff review picked up that it needed improving, because it says implement a private rentals charter in the version that you've seen, but actually there is already a private renters charter, and the wording has now been updated to review and update the charter. So I think that it's a slightly different situation from what you might have thought from the wording. So apologies for that.
Yeah, I'd assumed from the wording that there was something else grander coming down the line that would have had a significant sort of impact on our renters. But if we're in effect continually improving and innovating for something for the lifespan of the corporate plan, that seems much more sensible. Thank you. Councillor Osborne, you're next, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to ask the same question on that, so thanks for asking that one. Just wanted to pick up on what, sorry, I've forgotten who said it now, about, I think it was Ramona said it about the targets for insulation, and I think it was renewable energy installations as well. I might have got that wrong. And saying that Scrutiny could recommend to up those targets, and I'd like to suggest that Scrutiny does recommend that. Obviously, I appreciate what Ramona said about the team has looked at this and decided that that's what's possible. I think that there are ways that the council can facilitate, if not directly themselves, facilitate greater investment in insulation and retrofitting of homes. I've mentioned the example of Lewis earlier. I think there's other examples, and so I think we should be aiming for a higher target. And you know, this is such an important issue. It covers fuel poverty, it covers the cost of living crisis that we've got now, it covers green jobs and creation of jobs, as well as climate change and health. So I really think that it should be an absolute priority for the council.
Thank you for that. Councillor Waters, did you want to come in on?
Well, just to say, we recognise the importance of it, and we were successful in getting £3 million out of the government as part of that. And of course, we do a lot of work around, you know, the sort of installation of our own properties, upgrading. But what we have got, of course, and that £3 million, of course, I think for the private rented sector, of course, 25% of the population live in the private rented sector. And I think in the environment strategy, which I think we all signed up to, there was an acknowledgement of the financial scale. It's not just £1 billion; it's much more in terms of doing that. And you know, clearly, you know, we will work extremely hard to get that funding, and we do spend, you know, substantial amounts of money on housing stock every year to make sure those properties are upgraded and they're energy efficient and so on. So I think across the piece, and one thing I'm coming out of this, because I know Green parties across the country are talking sort of a national Green Party narrative around retrofitting. So one thing I take away from the repetition, I'm not saying it in a pejorative way, but it's been a theme, let me put it that way, of some of the points from colleagues, I think pulled together, you know, precisely, maybe making more explicit when we debate this in the budget cabinet, budget council, just what's being done in that area by the council. It doesn't lack ambition.
Can I just come back on that, Chair? Yes, first of all, you're right, Alan, that this is a theme nationally for the Green Party as well as obviously locally. And the reason we're repeating it so often is because I think there's more that can be done. And specifically, the money that the council's got, the 3 million from government, you know, that's great. It's not enough. And we've said on a number of occasions that I think that the council can be looking beyond government grants. So again, you know, Lewis is an example, and the other 6 councils that they're working with, Bristol and their City Leap programme. I can't remember other examples off the top of my head, but there are other councils that are looking at getting private sector or third sector, you know, community level engagement on expanding retrofit work, so not just relying on this inadequate government.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see where they might raise that money. I'd be interested to see some of the examples. And I suppose the other thing is, if you're spending £1 billion on retrofitting, you've made, those local authorities have made that a priority. But what other things fall by the wayside in committing those resources? I'm not saying that's a wrong decision, but there is an opportunity cost to all of that. And I will be looking up the authorities that you've referenced and look around.
I mentioned them several times before, so
some of the other examples as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. I just need to really highlight to members that we're approaching the 2-hour mark. I've got Councillor Galvin and Councillor Huntley who have indicated that they want to speak. I've got 6 recommendations that officers have noted down already that I will read out to you. Councillor Carlo is throwing her hat into the ring now as another speaker. If we get to the 2-hour mark, we will then need to have a resolution when we finish this item if we wish to continue the meeting to deal with the work programme and the bin task and finish update and various other things there. So let's crack on. Councillor Galvin, please.
Thank you. Just to say, yeah, it would be nice if this meeting could be used to sort of increase the ambition of the council around tackling the climate crisis with some more retrofitting. So I think, yeah, I totally accept what Councillor Waters says, that a lot has been done, but a lot more needs to be done. So I think that would be a very positive, and perhaps we could have a targeted increase in it that would show the direction of travel. But the one thing I wanted to suggest was there's a bit of a lack of councillors' input in here. There's kind of people that liaise with communities in a democratic way. And I know on page 29 of the 38, it says effective support of the development of our members. Could we look at increasing this by having a KPI that's linked to the councillor inquiry service? Where we ask the council questions. So, it would be a relatively straightforward KPI to introduce. You could just monitor how many questions are satisfactorily resolved, and it would be a helpful indicator of the activity of councillors with the community and the council's effective liaison with councillors. So I just wanted to put that forward as an idea. For this part, briefly, I'll let others speak.
Thank you for that. Anyone like to come in on that? Okay, thank you. In which case, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Chair. We discussed unmet housing needs a little bit earlier. In aim 3, infrastructure and housing. There's an aim to develop a pipeline of potential housing. I wonder whether there's an opportunity here to explore options for compulsory purchase orders for stalled sites, as we've successfully done in Mile Cross with the King's Arms site.
Thank you for that. Can I bring someone in to talk about the sort of practicalities around having that as a recommendation? Graham.
I mean, that is, I would suggest that, that falls under the heading of secure and managing funds from a range of things to, amongst other things, develop the pipeline of sites. As it happens, we've been able to secure, as part of the Towns Fund, up to just shy of £5 million to enable us to do that. That may involve things like compulsory purchase, but that's not the only way that we've got of doing it. It's certainly, at the moment, as we are funded through government, it's certainly a tool in our armoury that we can use to deliver some of the stated objectives in the corporate plan, both about removing blight, derelict and stalled sites which hinder, harm neighbourhoods effectively, but also about delivering much needed housing across the city. That is sort of monitored as a specific programme through the Townsdale board and through we're producing a monitoring report that we'll be reporting through to Cabinet shortly on that. As it's time limited, I wonder in my own mind as whether we might be hostage for fortune, because if corporate plan a couple of years' time, we might not have the money to enable us to do that sort of activity if we can't replace it. But it's an important activity that's going on at the moment. I don't know if that helps you decide whether that needs to be specifically referred to in a different way.
Councillor Huntley, can I bring you back there, please?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I understand, Graham, what you say here. I do certainly take the point that we don't want to make ourselves a hostage to fortune. So I'll perhaps withdraw that as a recommendation.
Great, thank you very much for that. Councillor Carlo.
Chair, can I highlight we are at 6:31 at this point. I believe that's the 2-hour mark.
So the 2-hour mark would be at the end of this item rather than I'm advised by the monitoring officer that the constitution is ambiguous, but it's at the end of this item.
Well, could we have no more additional speakers other than Councillor Carlo?
That's what I hope. I hope to wrap us up fairly quickly. Councillor Carlo.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, I just wondered if it's relevant to raise the risk register. I wanted to make a point in relation to climate change. It's got in there the 2030 date as Council's own operations becoming carbon neutral, but it also refers to emergency planning for severe weather events. But I feel it needs to go further than single events, and to recognise the need for climate adaptation on an ongoing way and in a holistic way. For example, dealing with overheating. I don't know if it would be possible to amend the register in that way, please.
Okay, can I get any comments to that on people, please, from people? Graham.
I'm just questioning in my own mind of the relevance of this to the corporate plan. Corporate plan clearly refers to the importance of maintaining that risk register, but effectively it's a separate document. And as officers, we've been going through a process which I think was driven by a previous scrutiny committee consideration of that, to actually consider whether the corporate risk register adequately reflects the risks posed by climate change. So that's sort of work in progress. I don't think it needs to be referred to specifically within the corporate plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Carlo, did you want to come back at all? No, okay. So I've got in front of me, which I'm just trying to format and then see if I've got the ability to screen share, because it will make life easier. Can I screen share this? What can you see? Can you see my Word document at the moment?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so these are the recommendations that officers have picked up as the discussion has been ongoing today. So we've got Councillor Carlo's initial one of considering creating a senior level resilience officer with cross-cutting council responsibilities to ensure the council is working toward and is supported in achieving net zero targets. We've then got a couple of wording recommendations from Councillor Galvin. I then forget, apologies, who the remainder of the recommendations are from, but we've got the one around KPIs on rollovers, previous KPIs, I think from Councillor Driver, target for the total number of private sector installation measures completed by the council, and a KPI linked to the councillor inquiry service. So I'm keen to get a steer from the committee on those as to how many of those are people are prepared to agree now as a recommendation, as recommendations. Councillor Osborne.
Can I just say on number 6, is it possible to make that installation measures completed or facilitated by the council? Because that then brings in the point of, working with partners to achieve that.
Councillor Driver.
Can we take a vote on each one? Because there's some there which will I will definitely be voting against. So.
Yeah. Now, this is where it's going to be a slight challenge. So in order for me to share my screen with these on, I can't see you. So, I can see just a couple of you. So we can do a vote. I will rely on officers to tell me whether it stands or falls. So show of hands then on item 1, please. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions?
Chair, can I just pause you there a moment? Sorry to inconvenience you. It's quite difficult for officers to also see.
Yes, of course, you're in a similar position.
Perhaps, would you be as kind as to, given they've been on screen for a while, read each out?
Yeah.
Remove the screen share if we read each out and then take the votes.
Yeah, let's do that. So, number 1 was to consider creating a senior level resilience officer with cross-cutting council responsibility to ensure the council is working toward and is supported in achieving net zero targets. All those in favour, please. And use your actual hands, please, because some members have got some issues with the virtual hands. So actual hands up for that. Yeah, all those against. That has fallen. Recommendation 2 was to amend aim 1 with the wording listen to communities and use their views in decision making. All those in favour? Any against? No, that is passed. Thank you. Recommendation 3, aim to amend aim 2 to amend the wording work with partners to increase sustainable transport and improve air quality. All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? I can't see any against when I'm scanning. No, that's passed. Thank you. Recommendation 4, those KPIs that are rollovers of existing targets due to upcoming reviews could be indicated as such for clarity. All those in favour? Yep, scanning around. That's a full house there. Thank you. Recommendation 5, include previous KPIs in performance documents to understand if the council is achieving its targets. Councillor Driver was up there incredibly early with his hand. So all those in favour on that? Yeah, that is carried. Thank you. Recommendation 6, increase targets for the total number of private sector insulation measures completed or facilitated by the council. All those in favour, please show. Okay, that's 4. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so 4 in favour, 5 against, so that falls. And the final recommendation include a KPI linked to the Councillor Inquiry Service. All those in favour? Okay, any against? Any abstentions? Okay, 1 abstention. That is carried. Thank you very much. So we've got some recommendations. We've had a good discussion today. So we now need to, we've passed the 2-hour mark. We've got 1 item left, which will probably take around, or not particularly long to deal with. So, but Leah, can I bring you in here, please?
Yeah, if you'll just indulge me a minute, Chair. I'm conscious because you mentioned about my advice earlier being a bit ambiguous. So the Constitution says after 2 hours, then essentially the Chair calls a vote on any remaining business to be dealt with. So it doesn't particularly well cover the 2 hours. So generally in meetings, we do try and conclude the current item swiftly as we're approaching 2 hours, which is what we've done here, and then we take the vote. So that was just where I was coming from in my advice.
Yeah, I think it was the Constitution that was ambiguous, not your advice. So, can I take a vote on whether or not we can continue the meeting to deal with the work programme item? All those in favour of continuing the meeting, please indicate. Okay, all those against, please indicate. So we are not continuing the meeting. Thank you very much, and I'll circulate a note with those things that needed to be noted from the work programme item. Thanks very much for